Well, we've got a new episode of We Don't Color on the Dog for the last week or so, trying to make contacts in Idaho for people that are familiar with Scott Yainer and this national Christian movement, national conservative movement that seems to have really deep roots in Idaho and what it might mean for us in Pensacola. Through a mutual friend, I was able to contact Christa Hazel, who is an Idaho resident. She is a former school board member, has been very active in what has been gone over what was a fairly hostile takeover of a small community college in her hometown, North Idaho College, which I think could have some parallels of what could happen here at the University of West Florida. So, Christa, thank you for doing this interview.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Rick. I appreciate it.
Now, this has been talk a little bit about describe North, NIC, North Idaho College. You are a student body president there. Talk a little bit about it and then how it began to shift.
So North Idaho College is located in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It's Kootenai County. It's supported by Kootenai County residents and also funded by the state of Idaho as well. And there's some federal funding. We are a few hours south of the Canadian border, and we are maybe a half hour east of Spokane, Washington. And we're fairly landlocked, or other landlocked as in the next institution outside of Coeur d'Alene for learning is a four-year University of Idaho, and we're about 6-hour drive from Boise State.
Okay. Now, you were on the school board, but what we saw happen was a major shift. Their community elects the board of trustees. Is that correct?
Our community college, yes. So our community college has 5 trustees that are elected. They ran, it's a nonpartisan position, but we eventually ended up in 2020 with a hyper-partisan election where we found a board majority that was elected with agendas that they never shared completely. It was an agenda of chaos, not really conservatism. It, to quote our president, Nick Swain, just went before our accreditation body because we're defending accreditation and the ability to survive and continue. And, what's the difference? President Swain said we've gone from chaos to true conservatism. So where we started and where we are, it's been a roller coaster. I would say that what we found with this kind of leadership was not only jeopardizing accreditation, but taxpayers took a real hit. But North Idaho College is an economic engine driver, and it's used for workforce training. Like a community college is different than a 4-year, and we have a workforce training, we have a career technical paths, and we have 4-credit transfer programs. And
We have a Pensacola State College that takes that role here. They're 2 years. They do have a couple of 4-year degrees, but primarily they do a lot of certifications and job training, and then you can transfer to another Florida institution and have credit for what you take at the community college.
It's, there's great things about higher education, and it's not necessarily academic programs. In our community, and I'm sure Pensacola is the same, they actually need all the support that these colleges and universities bring. What we found is once we started to have to look at what it would mean if we lost accreditation or if we kept going down this road, we realized our community college brought in $60 million into the economy. And if we were to lose accreditation and not be able to get back, that started to look like, akin to a natural disaster. And who would opt in for a natural disaster? But what's unique about this is kind of interesting is I've often used Florida hurricanes as an example of what we don't want at our community college. And I have cited Mrs. DeSantis's efforts one time after a hurricane. I think she raised about $60 million. Something almost equivalent to what our community college hit would be. And I use that as an example of what's at stake. And it's a matter of context of when you're thinking about these things and what these policy debates actually mean. And it's unfortunate that more colleges and universities look like they're going to be dealing with what we've gone through, and it was incredibly divisive. It was scary, it was stressful, but through grit and determination, money, and also a lot of prayer, I think we're going to come out the other side.
Well, in looking at the, I've done a lot of reading the last couple of days on your town in Idaho, NIC, realizing that the state of Idaho has had a huge influx of people outside the state that have moved there. I think I saw one really weird that this is the last white Christian town in America where that's the kind of rhetoric that was out there. And then I noticed that the other thing that happened was a lot of fake news websites popped up.
Zombie papers. I think in your business, do they call them zombie papers? Something like
And
that?
I'm gonna
Propaganda.
but yes, and they ghosted you. They ghosted, that y'all were Biden loving DEI Antifa, fans, and created, just a total narrative saying that, again, they're the good guys, they're the real conservatives, they're the real Republicans. You're not. You had Save NIC was one of your groups,
Mm-hmm.
and their side was really tied to some very anti-Semitic. I mean, their side was a lot of ties. The Idaho Freedom Foundation. They all have these names that sound good, but aren't about anything but freedom.
Well, I would say the Idaho Freedom Foundation is the largest super lobby group in Idaho. They rate our legislators on an Idaho Freedom Index. Only IFF is the ones that they score and rate, and they've been effective in marching our legislators farther right. While at the same time, we've had other groups that just appear out of nowhere. Websites, papers, content creators are here and either very interested in our politics or they are getting paid. When they work in unison, it becomes kind of what North Idaho College and our community went through. But I don't think it's reflective of Republicans in general.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a lifelong conservative. I affiliate with North Idaho Republicans because I don't affiliate with some of these crazy groups. Why? Because in my view, they have some views that just are too far for me, or something that I don't believe are reflective of my community. And you want members of your community that really understand your community, that are looking out for your community when they're in these leadership positions, as opposed to think tank groups and people who just newly relocated and they're running from something, but they won't tell you what.
Right.
And that's also the other problem. Is I'm a believer in transparency and accountability, and there wasn't transparency, and it was very difficult to get accountability using policies in place in hopes that board chairs would honor them. What we discovered is board chairs just didn't honor policies. And the difference now is we have a full board that will honor our policies, that are looking out for the college, that aren't looking for unusual ways to fight against things like federal financial aid or DEI. If DEI is a problem in a university, show where it is and be willing and courageous to have a community discussion, so you have conscious awareness as to what the direction is of your institution, as opposed to questioning and wondering, like, what's going on here. Rational people just say, what's the plan? And when others don't offer that in a rational way, equally rational way of, thanks for asking, this is what we see and this is how we'd like to handle it. It's elections have consequences, and unfortunately it sounds like you're starting to go through that.
Now, the other thing I noticed too at NIC was there was one of the first things the new trustees did when they came on board was to fire the president.
Yes, it's fire the president. And so they've They fired one president, and then they tried to fire a second. We could barely get him hired before they were finding ways to attack him. And you're right, there were very anti-Semitic related groups. I would consider Vincent James Fox is affiliated with Nick Fuentes' America First Foundation. Vincent James Fox was very involved in organizing community to show up to the first firing of the first president of North Idaho College. We also saw Fox appear in December 2022 in public comment, where the statements were definitely of a groyper nature, or what's America First Foundation. I'm using their terms, not a pejorative. And groyperism, that kind of, I think you're referring to it as Christian nationalism. Unfortunately, there's some co-opting that's being done in Republican tents. And unless you are living in the weeds online, you may not know what someone like a Scott Yenner or the think tank behind him, how involved it is, what kind of coordination there may be, and what's really the plan versus what may be an understanding from an elected official who, likes the sound of red meat.
Right.
As a
Well,
Republican,
it,
it can
it
sound
sounds
good, but
great.
if it's not
It
true.
it raises money. But there's a playbook, I think, and I think y'all, what happened in your town with North Idaho College is a playbook, and now they're going to a bigger college. We're Division II. We're over 14,000 students. We're now the next test lab for these guys, and that concerns me. I was looking at some of the analysis. Y'all successfully replaced those board members this past November. Congratulations.
Thank
That was
you.
a big lift, and the community made that happen. But I've noticed in some of the analysis that the accreditation thing, losing it was huge, because then your students didn't have credit when they tried to go to a college or a university. And you've lost students. Your budget is way blown up because they had to pay off all these presidents. The faculty is harder to find faculty in that environment. And I feel like this is where we could be going. Now, the only thing that's even more scary than this, Christa, is now you're hearing talk. Here in Florida, you're hearing talk from Governor DeSantis, but nationally, some of these yahoos, they want to do with accreditation altogether. That way, they
Yes.
won't do whatever they want, and there's no consequence. No one's going to
Yes.
say there's a standard.
Right.
What do you think about? I mean, does that bother you too?
Well, yes, you have to have standards. First of all, I appreciate my college credit. I've done well knowing that I've learned to a standard that's universally accepted. And, as a mom, if I take my kids to the hospital, I want to know that that nurse was trained at an accredited university or college, not our former board chair's garage in his school of wrestling that he's set up, and without accreditation, you really could have, Todd's School of Wrestling, for example, and, that's not what you need. If you take it out a little bit further for what it means for your community, in our experience, we could have somebody like a car dealership. They have to have an accredited institution to run training for their staff in order for their staff to adequately fix our vehicles. And what we were finding is, that they don't just call up and say, hey, next month. Those things are like, hey, in 6 months, in 12 months, and in 6 months or 12 months, with the way we were going, they weren't sure we would have a college left, and they needed to keep business moving. So what we found is, we are fortunate that we live 20 minutes, half hour from Spokane, Washington. But essentially what was happening is we had some employers looking to a blue state for their training and taking their training out of our state. And that was because of the instability and chaos that our college was undergoing, without any sort of, just here's the plan or here's the problem. It just, they were barreling towards a goal, but never really sharing the goal. And unfortunately, it always looked like they were willing to play chicken with accreditation for the political points of accreditation, without much consideration on what it meant for the rest of us who don't have this, focused issue of government funding, and all of these things are worth conversations. It's just I'm of the approach that the least damage to all while having these conversations in an adult-like manner, transparently, with accountability and respect. And respect. I have seen some social media on your new board chair where people are saying fire the president, unless your school is a third libertarian, tear it all down. That's the same kind of rhetoric we saw. It's short-sighted. It may feel good to whoever's saying it at the moment, but for the rest of us that rely on a higher education institution to be there, whether it's for entertainment, or it's to keep our businesses going, or it's to keep our communities healthy and thriving, those are all the things that are at risk.
To see that y'all went through it, y'all have a little bit more control than we have, and that's a little bit frightening. But those appointees still need to be approved by the Senate. They get to sit on the board without approval. So
one thing that we didn't have in our corner that you may have is your legislators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Every single one of our county legislators stood up against our college and stood up to defund it. They're defunding they wanted to defund it. And if you still have relationships with legislators who are willing to consider the pros and cons of what a healthy university looks like, then you're in a better position than we were. And, not everybody, they think they know what they're signing up for, but not everybody is willing to stick it out. I think your new board chair, he's pretty committed.
He has zero consequences. He's going to do the meetings by Zoom. He's not going to meet anybody in the grocery store. He's not going to go, to a restaurant and have somebody confront him, or go to church. This is the ideal situation for somebody like this.
It's almost the reverse conversation. When we had 3 trustees resign, and that got us to the state board appointments, the propaganda coming out of that was that these are state appointments. These are unelected bureaucrats. They are pushing an agenda that wasn't elected and is against the people. And yet, on the other hand, that seems like what's happening in your community. It would be scary to have somebody so directly linked to think tanks with some crazy ideas. That's it, but it can be done. People came around and rallied. There are always going to be some that will never see it your way, that think the board chair you've got is awesome. But most people just need awareness. And once they kind of give it some thought, or you just say, well, do you believe your wife should be able to vote?
I'm going to go ahead and end. We'll talk again. I'll let you know how the drama plays out. Thank you. About that man, and to see when just